So let's get into the rules of APA format. In general, yes, there are a lot of little rules to keep in mind. You need to use a clear, legible, professional, and consistent font. This is new to version 7. It used to be that Times New Roman 12-point font was the only acceptable font to be used. Now, the writers of the manual do state that Times New Roman 12 is still the preferred font. Other fonts are now considered acceptable as long as you're consistent with them throughout your whole paper. Of special note, when you open a Word document, the default is usually Calibri 11-point, and that is now considered an acceptable font and size in APA format. Now, don't go mixing and matching. Don't do Calibri 12, don't do Times New Roman 11. Calibri 11, the Word default, is acceptable. Times 12, the preferred font, is also acceptable. You need to have at least a 1-inch margin on all sides. Everything needs to be double-spaced and only double-spaced with no big gaps between the sections or between paragraphs. Don't justify your lines, and by that I mean in Word, stick with the default setting of flush left or left align, I think it's called. Don't switch over to the format that makes it so that both the left and the right margin are straight. The right edge of your words should be ragged, and I'll show you some examples of this later. Every paragraph, even the first paragraph in a section, needs to be indented. The only exceptions to this are the abstract and any block quotes you put in, and we'll talk about both of those later. Every section of your paper needs to be labeled with the section name. That section name is centered and it's bold. The exceptions to this are the title page, which is just the title page. It doesn't need to say title page. And the very first section of your paper, the introduction, does not get the label introduction. Instead, you repeat the title of your paper from the title page, centered and bold. Now that's another change from APA 6. Now the title on the title page and the title at the top of the introduction are both bold, as are the headings for abstract and references. All headings just flat out bold from now on. All your pages, even your title page, needs to have a running head at the top left and a page number at the top right. We'll talk more details about the format of this running head later. And I did put a little note there saying check with your instructor. Under APA version 7, they've actually stated that student papers no longer need to have a running head. You do still need a page number, but you don't need a running head. However, they have specified check with your instructor's preferences. And personally, since I feel like APA format is career prep for submitting papers for publication, you're going to need a running head when you do that, so you might as well get used to having a running head now. I don't see a point in not including it on student papers. So for my class, I would definitely like you to have a running head on all your papers, please. Now there are a lot of other little formatting details throughout the APA manual. I'm not going to go through all of them. We'd be here forever if I did that. Just some general rules of thumb though. When you're introducing a new or a technical term, for example group labels or rating scale anchors, don't put them in quotation marks, italicize them. On a similar note regarding italicization, you don't use italics for emphasis unless the emphasis would be completely lost without the italics. Try to write clearly enough that your point is there without needing to resort to any special formatting. Now, APA format also uses the Oxford comma. The Oxford comma is when you're doing a list of items, it's a comma between the last two items in the list. Some different format rules actually leave out the Oxford comma. APA uses it. For example, I had eggs, comma, toast, comma, and orange juice. That is clear. It is a seriated list with 3 items. Without it, I had eggs, toast and orange juice, and toast and orange juice says, okay. Obviously that's fairly silly, but it's an example for why the Oxford comma clarifies your meaning. The other one here. After beating the Steelers, Tim Tebow thanked his parents, God, and Mrs. Trunchbull, all 3 of them. Without the comma between God and Mrs. Trunchbull, he might be claiming that he's thanking his parents, who are God and Mrs. Trunchbull. Again, a bit of a silly example, but hopefully you can see where the lack of that comma can create some confusion in which items are actual separate list items and which items go together. So here's a quick little example of some writing. You can see I've got the running head there on the left, and it's all caps, the page number over there on the right. I've got scale anchor points right here, they're italicized. Over here I have a subheading. This is a level 2 heading, so it's flush left, not centered. We'll talk about headings later, but it is bold still. Here you can see what I meant by leaving your right margin ragged. The left side is all lined up, but the right side ends wherever it happens to end. It isn't stretched out to all be in one place. All my paragraphs are indented, even this one, that's the very first paragraph in the section. And the other thing to point out here is the use of numbers. You can see I've got numbers that are spelled out here. 1 page of 4 rating scales, 4 semi-randomized orders. And I also have numbers that are in digits, 21 response sheets, 30 seconds long. The general rule of thumb when writing about numbers is that if it's a very small number, under 10, you spell it out. If the number is over 10, you use digits. Now there are a lot of exceptions to this. In fact, you may have noticed one on the previous page. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of the more common exceptions you may encounter. Never start a sentence with digits. Either rearrange the sentence so the number doesn't come first, or spell out the number even though it's large. Any mathematical expressions, numbered series, exact measurements, comparisons, those should all be kept as digits because they are specific, so they get treated as something more mathematical than just a word in your sentence. If you're comparing two different numbers to each other, one is over 10, one is under 10, you keep them in the same format for consistency. So 12 women, 9 men. Now statistics goes mostly beyond what we'll cover in Psych 215, but you will be reporting some statistics within your labs. And so the general format is that because of the precision of statistics, you will always use digits no matter how small. You will take all your numbers to exactly 2 decimal places, even if they're zeros, still include those 2 decimal places. The one exception is the p-value. You'll learn about that later in the semester. Take the p-value to 3 decimal places. Any statistical abbreviations, M for mean, SD for standard deviation, N for your sample size, T, F, and P are all statistical things. Those abbreviations all get italicized. Just the letters, not the numbers that go with them. Just the abbreviation gets italicized. One exception is when you're reporting a confidence interval. CI is straight text. Anytime you have equation elements like equal signs, less than signs, you include spaces on both sides of them. They're like words in a sentence. You wouldn't squish those together, so don't squish your equation elements together. And the final point to remember with statistics, and this is a finicky point, when your number that you're reporting is less than 1, you need to think about the nature of that number and can it be greater than 1? If it can, you need to include a 0 in front of the decimal place to show your reader, I didn't forget anything, it is 0 point whatever. If it's the type of number that can never be greater than 1, it only ever exists from 0 to 1 or from -1 to 1, you don't include the 0. There would never be anything but 0 in that position, so you don't need it there to tell your reader anything important. So in this example, I'm reporting a t value. It equals 0.46 because t is something that can go greater than 1, and the p value that goes with that is 0.842. P can never be greater than 1, so it doesn't need a 0 in front. Now that's stats that's beyond the level of this course. So in each case, I will generally tell you this number needs a 0 in front, that number doesn't, but keep this in mind as you're going forward. So a little example here from a results section of a paper. You can see that table 3, vocalises 2, 3, and 6. These are all kept in digits because they are specific reference points, not just words in the sentence. On the stats here, you can see examples of these leading zeros on the SEM, the confidence interval, and on the effect size over here, whereas the p-values all don't have those leading zeros. So again, this level of stats is beyond Psych 215. However, generally speaking, when you're reporting the numbers I give you and as you go forward into other courses, keep this formatting in mind or return to this when you get to that point in your education.